Let's see, what am I missing here? Oh yeah. Hat, check. Sunglasses, check. Pepsi, check. Notes, check. Sources, check. And thick skin, check. Let's go. Welcome back to Going to Blue Dude, everybody, and all we do here is college football. So if you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. And as always, feel free to send gear to represent you and your team. Look around. That's what my background is made of. So if you want to be a permanent part of Going to Blue Dude and my background, send gear to represent yourself and your team to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. You know, usually whenever I talk about conference realignment, I talk about certain teams leaving one conference and going to another conference. But both conferences, the one that they leave and the one that they go to, still exist as is. Today I wanted to go a different route. I wanted to talk about actual conference mergers. Every possible conference merger in the Power 5 and what percentage I give them as far as actually happening. And I give my reasons why I think they might happen and why they might not happen. The first one is the Big Ten and the SEC. This merger would be the merger of all mergers. Like, this would probably kill college football, just to be honest with you. They would own college football and everybody else would have to play for a national championship separately. This would be a national championship just for this conference. But the chances that I give this actually happening, 0%. I do not think this is happening at all. These are completely different conferences whenever it comes to culture, and they have different goals. One is with Fox, that being the Big Ten. One is with ESPN, that being the SEC. So I think they would just butt heads. I don't think this would ever happen. The biggest problem with this is two alpha males coexisting. And we all know that's just not a good idea. Two alpha males coexisting is never a good idea. So I give the chances of the Big Ten and the SEC merging a 0%. The next merger I want to talk about is the SEC and the Pac-12. The chances that I give this merger of happening, also 0%. The lack of brand strength left in the Pac-12 wouldn't make up for the logistic nightmare. I mean, this would be a logistics nightmare for all teams involved. And I just don't think that there are strong enough brands overall in the Pac-12 left to make up for the logistics nightmare. I mean, there are still a couple of good brands like Oregon and Washington, but overall, the lack of brand strength left in the Pac-12 isn't strong enough to make up for the logistics nightmare. It's just not happening. I think culturally they're polar opposites, so they would definitely be butting heads a lot when it comes to that. I just think it's a bad fit. So for this merger, I also give this a 0%. I 100% think that this is not happening. Now we're getting into the mergers where I think there's an actual chance. Some just a little bit, and some there's an actual chance. The first merger I want to talk about whenever it comes to could actually happen is the Big 12 and the Big 10. But I only give this a 10% chance of happening. Now, geographically, this makes sense. But a lot of the schools in the Big 12 do not meet the academic requirements of the Big Ten. In fact, only a couple schools in the Big 12 have AAU status. And that's a big deal for the Big Ten. That's a big time deal breaker, I should say, for the Big Ten. Honestly, the only thing that makes this merger possible is unequal revenue share. And when I say unequal revenue share, I'm talking like massive unequal revenue share. So that's the only thing that even makes this merger possible, but it's definitely not likely. That's why I put the chances of this merger happening just 10%. The next merger I'm going to talk about is the Pac-12 and the ACC, and this has actually been discussed as a possibility. Myself, I only give it a 20% chance of happening. Talks fell apart, and there's a reason for that. Well, first off, the ACC and the Pac-12, they somewhat share academic standards. The biggest thing would be logistics. Logistics would be a problem, but here's the caveat. Both of these conferences are on thin ice right now, fighting for survival. So, if their only option was to merge, guess what? They're gonna merge. And you know what? Who knows? It might actually come down to that. The survival of the Pac-12 and the ACC might come down to they have to merge with each other. However, I'm still only giving it a 20% chance of happening because of the logistics nightmare, and they've already talked about it and the talks fell apart. Whenever that happens, it lowers the chances. The next merger I want to talk about, it is the SEC and the Big 12. This is an interesting one. I give this a 25% chance of happening. This could happen. Look, there are still some very, very valuable brands in the Big 12 that the SEC still wants. Right now, the SEC still wants a few brands that are left in the Big 12. Unequal revenue share would be a must for this to happen because there are some lower brands still left in the Big 12. So you're going to have to look into unequal revenue share, and it's probably going to be significant unequal revenue share. I will say this. These two conferences would fit in perfectly with each other when it comes to culture and geography. A lot of great rivals would stay intact, and a lot of old rivalries reunite. This wouldn't be a bad merger, and I give it a 25% chance of happening. The next merger I want to talk about is the SEC and the ACC. I also give this a 25% chance of merging. Now, in the offseason, we heard that North Carolina, Clemson, Florida State, and Virginia would be the first 4 teams that the SEC would take out of the ACC. Well, in this scenario, this is a complete merger. First and foremost, unequal revenue share. And we're talking about massive unequal revenue share because you're talking about bringing in brands like a Boston College, a Wake Forest, a Georgia Tech, the lower brands that really don't make that much money. However, the geography is perfect. Culture is also a perfect fit. And there are still some very valuable brands left in the ACC, both in football and basketball. I think if the ACC and the SEC merged, it would create a well-rounded conference. It would be very strong in football and very strong in basketball. And that's why I give this a 25% chance of actually happening. The next conference merger I'm going to talk about is the Big Ten and the Pac-12. I also give this a 25% chance of happening. First and foremost, unequal revenue share, probably significantly as well. I do think that these two conferences fit in perfectly together whenever it comes to culture and academics. Every time zone would be covered, so that's a big plus. Remember, there's a small gap, one time zone that the Big Ten is not covering, and that's the Mountain Time Zone. Well, if they did a complete merger with the Pac-12, even that would be covered. But like I said before, would the lower brands be okay with a significantly lower payout than the big brands? Because when I say significant, I mean significant. Just as an example, numbers off the top of my head, if they don't make sense, so be it. Let's say that the big brands get like a 12% cut, then the lower brands would probably get like a 3 or 4% cut. Yeah, massive, massive gap. So as long as they're okay with that, this is possible. And who knows, they might be okay with that. The next merger I want to talk about is the Big Ten and the ACC. I actually give this a 30% chance of happening. The caveat to this happening is actually Notre Dame. Notre Dame could be responsible for bringing these two conferences together. Every rival for Notre Dame would be in this mega conference except for Navy. But you know what? They could always bring in Navy, right? Of course, unequal revenue share, probably significant as well. But these conferences are very similar in academic standards. Not so much whenever it comes to culture, but I think it's doable. And that's why I give this a 30% chance of happening. Not bad. Yeah, this could happen. Next conference realignment, Big 12 and the Pac-12. I give this a 35% chance of happening. The first thing I want to say is I think both of these conferences will lose more members. That's going to happen. There's still some valuable brands, so these bigger conferences will come and get those valuable brands. In fact, it is possible that the Pac-12 could lose members to the Big 12. Maybe the Pac-12 is like, there's no need in that. Let's just straight up merge. Let's talk. Come on, let's get to the table. Let's talk about this. Instead of taking members, let's merge. What can we work out? What kind of deal can we work out? Because here's the bottom line. It might be that the only way that these two conferences survive as well is for them to merge. Adding the four corners, yes, that helps the Big 12, but there's still some bigger brands that are going to be picked off. So maybe it's just better for these two conferences to merge. And if it comes down to survival for both of these conferences and the only way is to merge, guess what? They're going to merge. The one thing that I'll have to say about this is the Pac-12 would have to bend in a lot of areas, especially whenever it comes to BYU. If they're willing to do that, then this merger is very, very possible. In fact, if it wasn't for the BYU issue, I would probably put the percentages even higher. But as is, it's still 35%. That's not bad at all. And finally, the last conference merger, and I think this is the most likely, the Big 12 and the ACC. And I put this at 40%. I do think there's a likelihood this could happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but out of all the conference mergers possibly happening, this is the one that I think would happen. Out of all the mergers options, these two conferences fit together the best. Now, this is my opinion, but still, in my opinion, they fit together the best. This mega conference would lock in a lot of great rivalries. I mean, you talk about a moneymaker. Rivalries make some money, and they would have a lot of great rivalries. rivalries. A lot of people wouldn't consider this, but if this were to happen, this mega conference would 100%, without a doubt, be the premier college basketball conference. The best. No doubt about it. No debate. 100% the best. The premier basketball conference in the nation. But they would still have enough brand power to be a good football league as well. So I think it would be a well-rounded conference. I think these two conferences fit together perfectly whenever it comes to culture. They fit good enough whenever it comes to academics. Not perfectly, but good enough. I will say this, there will need to be some unequal revenue share in this conference merger, but not as significant as the other conference mergers. So it wouldn't be as big of a gap, and I think those lower brands would be okay with this particular unequal revenue share. Very, very doable. So in my opinion, if two conferences were to merge, these are the two conferences that I think would be most likely to merge. And that's why I give this a 40% chance of actually happening. Y'all let me know in the comments section, out of all the merger possibilities in the Power 5, which one do you think is the most likely? And do you think it actually happens? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.